Harris Creek, thank you for allowing me in your living room, on your patio, on your iPhone, on your TV, above your fireplace, wherever you are right now. I'm so proud of this church and the way that we're rallying and the way that we're gathering and the way that you guys continue to meet in your life groups and wherever you're at around the world. Thank you for tuning in with us this morning, especially for the church body, the flock here of Harris Creek. As I was thinking about the message today, I was reminded of a time where I was driving down the highway and I was thinking, you know what, I am so tired of wearing my glasses. And I looked at my phone and I saw I had this very rare open afternoon, like there were no meetings scheduled that afternoon. And I thought, you know what, today I'm going to get LASIK surgery. And so some of you have probably thought longer and harder and more prayerfully about that, but I was like, yeah, why not? Let's go get LASIK. And I drove by this place that was offering free consultations. And so I went up and I just walked up to the counter and I said, hey, can I get LASIK today? And honestly, I kind of expected them to say no, but they said, sure. And so I went back for testing and they hooked me up to these machines and then they put me in this room and I was waiting for the doctor to come in. And when he did, he had some very different news than I expected. In fact, he said, I have some bad news for you. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's going to cost more than I anticipated, or they couldn't do it today. Maybe that was the news. But he said, we can't do LASIK on you. And I thought, why not? He goes, that's actually not the bad news. He said, you have a degenerate eye disease, and you do need surgery, but it won't help you see any better. It will just slow the process down. You are slowly going blind. You are slowly losing your vision, and we need to do a surgery on you, or you need a surgery just so that it will stop. And I sat there and I couldn't imagine that was going to be the outcome of that spontaneous decision. But that was really the beginning of a lot of doctor's appointments. And when I did go in for that surgery, what they actually did is they gave my eyeball a very severe sunburn, and they put some sort of drops in it to help the protein build up and to stop the eye from degenerating. And they told me that it was going to be painful afterwards, but nothing could have prepared me for what was going to happen. He said, the doctor said, hey, I'm going to give you these 5 drops in case of an emergency, but you cannot use more than 5 drops, and you really need to save the drops for when you can't stand it anymore. And he said, if you use more than the 5 drops, it will melt your cornea. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. And he goes, so take your pain medicine just so that you can kind of get through this. It's going to hurt. Well, I get home from the pharmacist, and the pain settles in, and I go into that bag from the pharmacist. Well, they didn't fill my pain prescription. I did have the 5 drops, which I used all 5 within an hour. And I sat there on my living room floor in the fetal position, screaming in pain with no end in sight. I just wanted relief. I would have done anything, said anything, or paid anything for relief, which is a really scary place to be. But I was desperate for relief. Some of you right now, in the midst of everything that's going on in our world, you're looking for relief. Maybe it's because of your finances, and you feel like you don't know where this ends and what's coming and when you'll go back to work. Maybe it's you need space, like you are cramped up in your house. Your kids are at your feet, constantly tugging on you, asking questions. Maybe it's that you need interaction with human beings. Like maybe you need to talk to somebody. Maybe there's conflict in your home and you need relief from the conflict. What is it that you need relief from today? That's what we're going to talk about as we dive into God's Word, the Scriptures. We're in a series called The Final Word, where we're looking at the final words of Jesus Christ on the cross. And I don't know what it is that you're looking for relief from. Maybe just you need some adult conversation, or maybe you need a break, or maybe you're still like running fast and your work hasn't slowed down, and it's like you're in the fast lane of the highway and the lanes beside you have come to a screeching halt, but nothing has changed for you while it's changed for everybody else, and you feel busier than ever and you need relief from that. For me, that's kind of where I feel like I'm at. Like I need margin. I feel like I need relief from trying to reinvent this 2,000-year-old tradition of church, and because everybody's on technology and I kind of work in a creative space, there's more and more interruptions and less time to work on the sermon, and so it's like I'm desperate for margin. What is it that you need relief from? We're talking about today a thirst for relief. As Jesus is going to say these words from the cross, I'm thirsty. And I don't know where it is that you're looking for relief, but I would encourage you to be cautious so that you might look in the right places. As we dive into this text, I'm in John 19. We're going to do some theological work up front, kind of unpack the idea of the text. We're going to look at two things that we learn from Jesus' thirst. And then before I wrap up, I have a word of caution for you from the scripture. This is what it says in John 19, verse 28. It says, later knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk from the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. Here Jesus displays his full humanity. You have God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, on the cross with need, fully human, saying, I'm thirsty. This is what Charles Spurgeon says about this. Our Lord is the maker of the ocean and the waters that are above the firmament. It is his hand that stays or opens the bottles of heaven and sends rain upon evil and upon the good. The sea is his, and he made it, and all fountains and springs are of his digging. He pours out the streams that run among the hills, the torrents which rush down the mountains, and the flowing rivers which enrich the plains. One would have said, if he were thirsty, he would not tell us. For all the clouds and rains would be glad to refresh his brow, and the brooks and streams would joyously flow at his feet. And yet, though he was Lord of all, he had so fully taken upon himself the form of a servant and was so perfectly made in the likeness of sinful flesh, he cried with fainting voice, I thirst. Jesus felt everything. In fact, here in Mark 15, verse 23, we know that early on in this journey to the cross, they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. This was the anesthetic of their day. This was to help relieve him from pain. But he said, no, I will feel everything. We see Jesus' humanity here, that on the cross he thirsts. He felt every blow, every whip, every piece of skin torn from his body, every hammering of the nail, the weight of the cross. He felt the coolness of their saliva when they spit on him. He felt every single thorn puncturing his forehead, and he felt that for you and me, and here he is thirsty. This is what's important about the reality of who Jesus was. For there to be a sacrifice for our sin, there would have to be three things necessary for there to be an acceptable sacrifice for our sin. One, the atoning sacrifice, the one who's atoning, would have to be human. Like if I'm going to pay the price or a sentence or pay for a crime that you've committed, I couldn't pass on that sentence to my dog or to a stick. The payment would have to be made by a human. But secondly, not just a human, the human would have to be undeserving of punishment themselves. Because if I'm going to pay for your sins, who's going to pay for my sins? See, we're both under the same sentence. We've sinned against a holy, eternal God. Our sins require an eternal payment, which leads to my third reality. It would be necessary that the payment is eternal. So the human, without sin, would have to either pay a price for eternity, or they would have to be an eternal deity. This is an impossibility, it seems, that you would have a human who is perfect, who is also an eternal deity, and yet we see in that reality that only Christ is a sufficient sacrifice for our sin. And this is the only way that we can look at the cross and be comforted. It's a strange thing to say that we would be comforted by the cross. This is the equivalent of me saying that you should be comforted by a bloody guillotine. Now, I was going to show you a picture one, but I don't know if your kids are present or who else is there, and the pictures that I pulled up are too horrific. If I showed you a bloody blade of a guillotine, you would know that someone just was decapitated. And I said, hey, be comforted by this image. You say, how? How am I to be comforted by that? Unless you knew that it should have been you who lost their head. And because someone lost their head in your place, you're now set free. The punishment that you deserved was paid, and therefore you don't have to pay it, so you keep your head only under that circumstance because you look at the guillotine and find comfort. In this small phrase, I am thirsty, we see the humanity of the Creator, God becoming a human, fully God. And in it we find empathy. And that's really my first point from this text. After we've done the theological work, that in Jesus' thirst, we see empathy. He struggled as you do and yet did not sin. And so he's gracious towards you and slow to anger. Some of you feel like God is perpetually disappointed in you. Like most of my life, this is where I was at. God was the sheriff in the sky that looked upon me with condemnation, and I didn't want anything to do with him. He was like that father figure shaking their head saying, what'd you go and do now? But that is not consistent with the God of the Scriptures because of the gospel. The God who stands outside of time somehow in a way that I can't fully comprehend no longer counts our sins against us. For there is now no condemnation for those of us who are in Christ. And somehow we see his empathy from this, that he desires good for us and that he loves us. Empathy is such a powerful force. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 9, Peter writes this, resist him, standing firm in the faith, talking about Satan, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. Because you know that everyone's suffering just like you are. You're experiencing the same things. We know that in 1 Corinthians 10:13, that no temptation has seized you except what is common to man. Except what is common to others, and God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear, and when you are, he will provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. The temptation you face is common to other people. Isn't that kind of like what it feels like right now, that we're all in this together? That we're all kind of going through the same things, that we're all in the same place, that we're all struggling in a similar way? God is faithful. So in the midst of the coronavirus, We're in this sheltering in place together. We're in the crashing stock market together. We're in the financial challenges together. But you know what we can also be in together is we can also be in God's Word together. We can also be huddled around a message, teaching from God's Word together. In fact, just yesterday, we started a new Bible reading challenge. We're not going to stop that. In fact, we're going to make it better, and you can find it on the app. I hope everybody watching right now has the Harris Creek app on your phone and on your device. And you can go on there. We started yesterday in the Gospel of Mark. Today we're in Mark 2. Jump on with us. Like if you didn't read the Bible this morning, if you didn't read the Bible yesterday morning, now is the time to jump in with us and go with us through the Gospel of Mark up till Easter. But in these verses, I am thirsty. You learn something about God's character, that He is compassionate, that He is empathetic. And when I think about that, the reality is I struggle in those areas. I tend to be more of a coach, get back in the game, let's go. Come on, we got to change the world. My kids get hurt, they fall down, skin their knee. I'm like, hey, get up, shake it off, you're going to be okay, it's fine. Doesn't need stitches, go play. Monica, my wife, she is the opposite of this. I mean, she empathizes as well as anyone I've ever seen. She will pick them up and hold them close and pat their back and whisper sweet things in their ears of comfort, right? The other day, my kids are in the kitchen and one of them drops something heavy on their toe and it hits their toe and they scream in pain and the tears immediately come. And I'm standing right there beside them like, come here. And they can hardly walk, but they limp past me all the way across the room to Monica, Mama, because she comforts them. Empathy's powerful. It pulls us into people. The God that you worship loves you. He cares about you. So much so that He left His palace and His kingdom and He came into this broken world and He suffered as you did and more than you ever have. We see this in this verse in Hebrews 4:15, I mentioned briefly last week. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet did not sin. So Jesus is thirsty. He experienced pain. Our God, the Creator, suffered. And from it, we know He empathizes with us in our pain. The second thing that I pull from this text is that in Jesus' thirst, we see consistency. That God is trustworthy, that God keeps His commitments, that God keeps His promises, that the God that you worship will not let you down. We talked last week about how He will never leave you nor forsake you, that He is consistent. It says, John writes the why Jesus said, I am thirsty, to fulfill the prophecies. It says in Psalm 22, verse 15, for my mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Psalm 69, verse 21, they put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst. There are over 300 prophecies in the Old Testament. It would be a mathematical impossibility for one person to fulfill all those 300 prophecies. They talk about where Jesus would be born, where He would live, what He'd do with His life. Talks about His family. It talks about where He would die, how He would die, when He would die. And here it talks about that He, in His death, would be thirsty. And so we see in this the consistency and the commitment of God, that He keeps His word. Someone asked yesterday, how do I share the gospel with somebody who they think that Christianity is a man-made religion, like it's a man-made idea? And I just said, ask them, who is Jesus? Like, what do you do? with this character in history that reset the calendar 2,020 years ago, born in Bethlehem, a town you would have never heard of, lived in Nazareth, a city that you would have never known, except he was born there and except he lived there. He's a carpenter, and somehow he changed the world and became the single most polarizing character in the history of history. Who was he? And he fulfilled over 300 prophecies when he showed up on the scene and lived this perfect life. Who is Jesus? This is the most important question we will ever answer. He was Lord when Psalm 22 was written. He was Lord when this scripture here happened, took place on the cross. He was Lord at the empty tomb, and he still is Lord today. That millions of people gather in his name or gather around devices today so that they might learn from a book that is all about him. He's consistent. He does what he says he's going to do. And can I just tell you this? That's refreshing in a world where nothing is consistent. All of the things that you depend on are shattering underneath your feet. Some of you, I know that you're really struggling with this. Some of you, your biggest struggle is control. I feel you. I can relate. And it just feels like the whole world is shaking and crumbling, and you're grasping for anything consistent. Because let's be honest, the things you thought were consistent, you realize the things that you were certain would be consistent aren't. Your kid's school, nope. March Madness, nope. The Olympics, nope. The Masters, things that you're like, well, surely the NBA, no. Graduation. God is consistent. He's dependable. He does what he says he's going to do. He's unchanging. He's there in eternity past, and he's there in eternity future. And you can trust him because all he's done since the beginning of time is proven himself trustworthy. His resume is flawless. And he loves you. And he loves you. And so let's talk about a word of caution. I want you to know that only Jesus will quench our thirst. Only Jesus will quench our thirst. As Augustine says, my soul will remain restless until it finds its rest in you, God. That is true for all of us. This is the lesson that we cannot learn. Do you know why we are discontent right now? Do you know why we're struggling with this shelter-in-place mandate? Why we struggle when they direct us through the grocery store, when our restaurants shut down, when we can't go through our routines, when our businesses close and our bank accounts diminish? It's because when we were thirsty, we drank from the wrong wells. We hoped in the wrong things. We found temporary relief in perishing objects that will just leave you thirstier than you started. The Apostle Paul, when he was in a prison in Rome, and he wrote the church in Philippi a letter we now know as Philippians. In chapter 4, he says this: I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. He says something crazy. He said, I've learned the secret of being content when I'm in need. You can't be content and in need. He says, I've learned the secret of being content when I'm hungry. No, the essence of being hungry is not being content. The essence of being hungry is not having your needs met. Like, how can you be hungry and content? He says, I've learned the secret. So there's a secret for us to learn. What can we learn? Paul teaches. I believe that Paul, who was able to find contentment in prison, like I can't even find contentment sheltering in place, Enneagram 7, need social interaction, like, hey, do you want to come over? What? It's against the law? Okay, that's a real big bummer because I love people, and as I said last week, I can't wait to give you a big old bear hug and lift you off the ground and twirl you around and everything. But somehow in prison, he's hungry and in need and content. It's because Paul learned that his greatest needs are satisfied in Jesus alone. And when he's hungry and there is no food, there is still Jesus. And when his kids are at his feet because they're not at school, there is still Jesus. And when there's no money in the bank, there is still Jesus. And when you're thirsty, there is one that has something to offer you so that you will never thirst again. And that should sound familiar to you because that is what Jesus said in John chapter 4. A woman comes up to him. She's self-quarantined, if you will, not because of the coronavirus, but because of her sin. In her shame, she goes to the well when no one else is there. She bumps into this rabbi. She feels prejudice toward him. She says, "How can you talk to me, Samaritan woman?" He tells her that he has a drink that if she drank it, she would never thirst again. This is what he says. Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again." That's the water from the well. "But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst again. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." "Well, first let me go get my husband." No, you have no husband. Or go get your husband, rather. "I have no husband." You're right when you say you have no husband, because the 5 men that you've been sleeping with or were sleeping with, they're not your husband either. By the way, men, relationships, sex, that's not going to satisfy your thirst. That's going to leave you wanting. Money, that will leave you wanting. You will not be the first person in the history of all of history to have enough. Be careful where you drink. Be careful where you drink, fam. I trust myself the least when I'm thirsty. I've said it before like this. I trust myself the least when I really, really, really want something, because I've learned that over time in isolation, I can masterfully justify the cravings of my flesh under the guise of spirituality. And so when I feel cravings and urges, that's when I want to step out of the driver's seat and say, "Hey, I need help because there's these things that I really want that I think might be poisonous." This is how Paul goes on to write it in the church of Philippi, chapter 3, Philippians. He says this, "For as I have told you before and now tell you again, even with tears, many live as enemies of the cross of Christ." So there are those who are enemies of the cross. Their destiny is destruction, he says. Their God is their stomach. Their glory is in their shame. Their mind is set on earthly things. Their God is their stomach. What does that mean? Their God is their stomach. Why does he say that? Their God is their stomach. This is what he's saying. They drink what they're thirsty for. When they crave something, they sip until they have their fill. They satisfy their cravings. Their mind is on earthly things. When you're thirsty, be careful where you go to drink. In 1943, Louis Zamperini, plane crashed over the ocean. Everyone died except 3 men who found a life raft. They were encircled by sharks, and they were on that water for over 40 days. They certainly should have died. In fact, one of them did. It was said that he drank the ocean water. That's the irony of dying of thirst, being surrounded by water. It's water you can't drink. If you drink, the salt is so concentrated in seawater that your kidneys will fail, your body will shut down. You'll actually end up thirstier than you started with. And so people literally die of thirst surrounded by water. You're at home right now, and you're surrounded by things that you want to pursue in your relief, that if you do, they will kill you. Not hurt you, kill you. Spiritually kill you. Right? We're seeing Pornhub announce some of the most record high numbers of visitors. Condom sales are up. Alcohol sales are up. Anger is up. Conflict is up. Frustrations are up, because maybe you're like, no, alcohol, condoms, no, not me. Frustrations are up. Anger's up. People are being short. Mom's being short with kids. Dad's being short with mom. We're all on edge. We don't like being told what to do. We want to be kings. We don't want to worship the king. We want to be our own king. Be careful what you drink when you're thirsty. Jeremiah 2 verse 13 says, my people have committed 2 sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Right now, if you drink from the wrong well, you're going to be left thirstier than when you started. But I want you to remember that Jesus empathizes with you, that in Jesus' thirst we see empathy. In Jesus' thirst we see consistency. He's dependable. God is reliable. He's unchanging. He will be there for you. And Jesus is the only one who will quench our thirst. And that's not pastor talk. Like, that's just reality. Everything else that we can drink from. Like if I come over here and I just say, hey, you want relief? You want to find relief from your pain? Look, here it is. Some of us would be excited thinking, oh yeah, maybe so, right? That won't give you, or maybe it's this, right? You think this isn't going to leave you thirsty? It will leave you thirsty. Or maybe it's this, right? This was my vice for a long time. Would escape and cope through the internet. I'm still healing from things I've seen on here. Looking for relief from this broken world. And some of you, you're like, no, none of that. That's not my problem. That's not going to fix me. But maybe if I said, hey, what's in here will give you relief. This will give you relief. This will satisfy you. You want it? You want that? Do you love that more than God? Do you want to worship at that altar? Do you want to drink from that well? That will leave you thirsty. There's another thirsty person in the scriptures. Shows up in Luke 16, known as the rich man and Lazarus, and he's in hell. And he says, Father Abraham, go tell Lazarus to dip his finger in water so that he may cool my tongue, for I'm here in torment and in agony. It's hot and I'm thirsty. And God, through Abraham, tells him, all you have to look forward to is thirsty. There is no relief for what you feel. You will only ever be thirsty. Juxtapose that with the woman at the well, and Jesus says, no, if you drink what I offer you, you will never thirst again. As I think back on that day, the horrific pain that I felt, like honestly, if hell is worse than the pain that I felt in my eyes, I can't even imagine. I'm in the fetal position, I'm screaming out, my chest hurts, my heart literally aches because it hurts so bad. And Monica calls the pharmacy, or calls the doctor to make sure that I can get that pain medication. And she gets off the phone and she says, he said it will only hurt for a little while longer. She had known and told him how long I had been in pain. And he told her, it will only hurt for a little while longer. Now, nothing had changed in my circumstance. The pain was still very much there. My eyes still hurt. It didn't take the pain away. But all of a sudden, I knew I was going to be okay. Because I knew relief was coming. I think that's what's so hard about our circumstance right now is we think, when is relief coming? Like, is it 2 weeks? Is it through April? You know, when does this change for us? Church, I want you to know, relief is coming. Relief is right around the corner. I don't know if it gets worse. I don't know if it gets harder. A big part of me believes that it does. Like, this is such a time for the church to shine and be the church and to be committed to prayer and to the scriptures. I think this is going to make us stronger. I think we're going to come out of this better than we went into it. But whether we do or whether we don't, I can tell you that hard times lay ahead. In this world, you will have trouble. But relief is coming. Jesus is going to come back and he's going to rescue us. And he's going to take us to a place where we will never thirst again. But we will be fully in his presence. And there will be a place of no weeping, no sadness, no crying, no sickness, no disease. Nothing contagious but love and joy and peace. Only the things of God. That is what we have to look forward to forever and ever and ever. Let me pray that we would hold out with hope. Father, I do know that relief is coming. That you have a plan for our church in all of this. Lord, would you help us to be faithful? God, would you remind us of who you are and what you've done for us through your Son, Jesus Christ? Would you fill our hearts with hope? Would you fill our hearts with peace? Would you help us to know that if we have Jesus, this is as bad as it's ever going to be? God, if there's anybody listening right now that doesn't have Jesus, this is as good as it's ever going to get. And so help us to be faithful with carrying your message forward to those that don't know who you are or what you've done for them. Father, would you protect our body? Would you protect us from the coronavirus? For anyone who's caught it or has it and doesn't know it, would you heal them, Lord? Would you stretch out your mighty hand and heal them, God? Restore them, restore their health. Protect their children, protect their family, protect our elderly, Lord. There are so many amazing followers of you who are over the age of 65 in our church. God, would you protect them supernaturally? Keep them from getting this virus. But Lord, would you heal us spiritually? I confess that there's a part of me, and I believe it's true of many listening right now, that at times or always we have hoped in the world and we have sought relief in the world. God, would you bless us? Would you keep us? Would you let your face shine on us
And Father, would you turn our hearts towards you and help us to find joy and contentment and satisfaction and relief in you alone. You are where relief is. Help us to believe that. In Jesus' name, amen.